Thank you to my Patreon members who helped make this video possible. It's 3:47 in the morning. You're asleep in a steel coffin stacked 3 men high in a room with 145 other sailors. The temperature is 110 degrees. You haven't seen land in 63 days. And then that sound hits. Every man in the compartment is on his feet in seconds. No lights, no time. You grab your helmet, your life vest, and you run, barefoot, half-dressed, through pitch-black corridors toward a battle station where, if a torpedo finds you, there is no way out. This is not a movie. This is your typical morning on a battleship during World War II when sailing in a combat zone. They called them cities at sea, and that sounds almost romantic until you realize that this city had no windows, no exits, and the walls were made of inch-thick steel that turned the whole place into an oven. A World War II battleship like the USS Iowa stretched nearly 900 feet, equal to almost 3 football fields. She displaced 45,000 tons. She carried 9 16-inch guns that could hurl a shell the weight of a Volkswagen Beetle over 20 miles. She was the most powerful machine the United States Navy had ever built, and crammed inside her were nearly 2,700 men. Think about that number. 2,700 human beings locked inside a metal hull for months at a time. No phone calls home, no weekends off, no quitting. The sleeping compartments were the worst of it. On the USS North Carolina, 146 men slept in a single room. Bunks were stacked 3 high. Canvas stretched over a metal frame with a thin mattress on top. Each man got 1 small footlocker. That was it. Everything you owned in the world fit in a box the size of a suitcase. There was no air conditioning. In the South Pacific, where these ships spent most of the war, the main deck could reach 100 degrees. Below deck, where you slept? 110. The Navy ran ventilation ducts, and small 12-inch fans were mounted on the walls, but the air they moved was hot, wet, and thick with the smell of diesel, sweat, and metal. Veterans later pointed out something chilling. Inmates in American prisons during the same period lived in more space, with better ventilation, than sailors on a U.S. Navy battleship. Many men gave up on sleeping below entirely. They'd drag their bedding topside and sleep on the open deck under the stars, which sounds peaceful until you remember that enemy submarines hunted at night, and a torpedo could turn that deck into a fireball without warning. And if you were unlucky enough to be berthed in the bow, every wave hit like a car crash. The ship would rise 20 feet, lurch forward and drop, slamming you into your bunk frame, over and over, all night. The men near the stern had it different, but not better. The constant whump, whump, whump of the propellers vibrated through the hull like a heartbeat that never stopped. Reveille sounded at 0545. 5:45 in the morning, every single day. The boatswain's whistle cut through the ship like a blade. You had minutes to roll out of your rack, fold your blankets with military precision, stow your bunk, most of them folded up against the wall, and get dressed. Then you reported for duty. A sailor's life was defined by one thing above all else: the watch. A watch was your shift, a 4-hour block where you had an active role in running the ship. You might be up on the bridge, scanning the horizon with binoculars for enemy planes. You might be deep in the engine room, monitoring boilers that ran at over 1,000 degrees, where the noise was so loud you communicated with hand signals. You might be in the magazine, surrounded by live ammunition, making sure the guns above had what they needed. The watches rotated around the clock. 4 hours on, 8 hours off. Except those 8 hours off weren't really off. You had maintenance, drills, cleaning details, and meals to get to. Sleep was something you grabbed in fragments. Feeding this floating army was its own military operation. The USS Iowa burned through 7 tons of food every single day, 1.5 tons of it fresh, 2 tons frozen, 3.5 tons dry. She carried 834 tons of food in her stores, enough to stay at sea for 119 days before a resupply ship had to find her. The food was functional. The Navy knew that meals were one of the few morale boosters available. Cooks did their best, but you were feeding thousands of men from a galley that never stopped running. Beans, cornbread, powdered eggs, canned meat, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. That was the reality. And water? Precious. Fresh water was reserved for cooking and the boilers. Sailors took what became known as the Navy shower. 30 seconds to get wet, turn off the water, soap up, then maybe another 30 seconds to rinse. Your entire bath took less than 2 minutes, and you were grateful for it. But here's the thing that surprises most people. A battleship wasn't just a weapon. It was a community. These ships had barber shops, tailor shops, cobblers who could fix your boots, and a printing press that published a daily newspaper, yes, a newspaper, at sea with war news and ship gossip. They had libraries, dentists, and a full hospital with an operating room, an X-ray machine, and a medical lab. When you put nearly 3,000 men on a ship for months, disease becomes the invisible enemy. A single case of measles or tuberculosis could tear through a crew faster than a torpedo. So the ship's medical team ran the sick bay like a small-town hospital, complete with quarantine wards. Off-duty life had its own rhythm. Card games ran around the clock, mostly poker, with stakes that ranged from cigarettes to next month's pay. Movie nights were sacred. The ship would rig a screen on the fantail, and hundreds of men would sit under the stars watching whatever film the supply ship had brought. Boxing matches were organized between divisions. Men wrote letters home constantly. It was the lifeline, the one connection to the world they'd left behind, and the drinking fountains, called scuttlebutts, became the gathering point for gossip, rumors, and speculation about where the ship was headed next. That's actually where we get the word scuttlebutt. It literally means gossip, and it was born on the deck of a warship. Everything I've just described, the routine, the boredom, the monotony, it all existed in the shadow of one sound: general quarters. When that alarm hit, the entire ship transformed in under 5 minutes. Every man dropped whatever he was doing and sprinted to his assigned battle station. Every watertight door slammed shut, every hatch sealed. The ship became a collection of airtight compartments, because if a torpedo or bomb found its mark, the sealed doors were the only thing keeping the ocean from swallowing the ship whole. And once those doors closed, you were locked in. If flooding started in your compartment, no one was coming to open that door. That was the deal. The ship mattered more than any one man. In the combat zones of the Pacific, general quarters was called at dawn and again at dusk every single day, because those were the hours when Japanese aircraft attacked, but it could come at any hour. Fog, a submarine contact, an unidentified ship on the horizon. The USS Washington logged over 3,000 calls to general quarters during her 4 years in service. 3,000 times, every man aboard dropped his fork, his cards, his letter home, and ran. Veterans described showing up to their battle station in nothing but their underwear, clutching their clothes under one arm and their helmet under the other. But there were rules, hard-learned rules. You wore long sleeves, always, because at Pearl Harbor, the men who died weren't mostly killed by shrapnel. They were killed by flash burns, the searing wave of heat from an explosion that burned exposed skin in an instant. They dyed their white sailor hats dark blue. A white hat, seen from a Japanese plane, was a target. And then there was the USS Texas. In March of 1945, during the invasion of Okinawa, the Texas's commanding officer made a decision that no other captain in the war is known to have made. He kept his entire crew, nearly 2,000 men, at general quarters for over 50 consecutive days. No rotations, no stand-downs. 50 days of sleeping at your gun, eating at your gun, living at your gun, because the kamikazes came in waves, sometimes dozens at a time, and the captain decided that the only way to keep his crew alive was to never let them stand down. It worked. The Texas left Okinawa without a single man lost, but the cost, the psychological cost, is something those men carried for the rest of their lives. Here's what doesn't make it into the history books. The bonds formed inside those steel walls were unlike anything else in human experience. You lived, ate, slept, worked, and faced death with the same men, day after day, for months and years on end. You knew the sound of every man's breathing in your sleeping compartment. You knew who got letters from home and who didn't. You knew who was scared and hiding it, and who was brave and hiding that too. One sailor from the USS South Dakota, a man named Gilbert Arbiso Jr., put it more simply than any historian ever could. He said there were moments when he felt like refusing to go on, when the fear and exhaustion were too much. But, he said, of course you always go on. It has nothing to do with being brave. It's just simpler to go on. That might be the most honest description of courage ever spoken. During peacetime, divisions were housed together, all the gunners in one compartment, all the engineers in another, but in wartime, the Navy scattered them deliberately. Men from different divisions were spread across different sleeping quarters throughout the ship. The reason was brutally practical. A single bomb hitting one compartment shouldn't be able to wipe out every man trained to operate the same system. Even the way you slept was a tactical decision made by someone who understood that you might not wake up. These men didn't have a choice about the world they were born into. They didn't choose the war. Most of them didn't even choose the Navy. They were drafted, handed a sea bag, and pointed toward a steel monster that would be their home, their workplace, and potentially their grave for the next 3 years. They endured heat that could make you faint, cold that could crack your skin, boredom that could drive you mad, and terror that could stop your heart. They did it on 4 hours of broken sleep and powdered eggs and coffee that tasted like it was brewed in an engine block. And when the war ended, most of them came home, took off the uniform, and never talked about it again. But the ships remember. The USS Missouri still sits in Pearl Harbor. The USS North Carolina still rests on the Cape Fear River. The USS Iowa is docked in Los Angeles. Walk their decks. Stand in those sleeping compartments. Feel how close the walls are, and you'll understand something that no documentary can fully capture. This was real. These men were real. And what they endured, quietly, without complaint, for years, is something the world should never forget.